lives, which began on separate paths, will be joined on one. But how did we get here? How did these two lovebirds migrate here into the Berkshires to pronounce their everlasting commitment to each other? Let us tell you the tale of Pigeon and Songbird.
Once upon a time, there was a one-of-a-kind pigeon. Pigeon was a handsome bird with a wonderful plumage, bustling chest feathers. He wasn't the tidiest of creatures, but he was who he was. He lived in a small town for most of his life, but he always wanted more. So he gathered up his belongings and attended a prestigious school, the Wild Plumage Institute, WPI for short. And he quickly made a name for himself as a rock star in the collegiate theater world.
In a not so far away land lived a songbird. Songbird was a bird like no other. Her gleaming, glittery, golden feathers were longer and more beautiful than any other birds in the entire land. Songbird sang Broadway songs from the treetops daily. She flittered across dance floors with infectious energy, but Songbird was not all just grace. She also had a brilliant mind and had a certain knack for biology and chemistry. Very well-spoken, very earnest. She oozed authenticity. In a pursuit to further her interest in biochem and the arts, she gathered her belongings and attended a prestigious school, the Wild Plumage Institute.
In her excitement to join the theater, she attended the flock of theater birds gathering one Friday afternoon. The group welcomed her with open wings, and Songbird was overjoyed to find the flock she would fly with for the next 4 years and beyond. It was in the theater Songbird first met Pigeon. As fate would have it, they were both cast in Bowerbird. Pigeon secretly had hoped to be cast as Songbird's love interest, as he was struck by her from the moment he saw her. Since every story needs a touch of irony, they were not cast as love interests, but as ex-lovers. And of course, this irony would not be lost on them for years to come.
As time went on, their paths continued to cross. If nothing else, they knew they would get to see each other when the flock would gather every Friday afternoon. During one meeting late that autumn, Pigeon was announcing a performance he was leading based on the life of the greatest bird he knew, Woodstock. Pigeon stood up, puffed out his feathers, and pronounced, "In this play you will find someone you used to know, or someone you used to be." He said this with beautifully confident, dramatic eloquence, as if everything he said had been carefully crafted in advance. These words struck Songbird, and perhaps some part of Songbird knew that she wanted Pigeon to play a role in her life. But in that moment, she wanted a role in his play.
To no one's surprise, Songbird was cast in Pigeon's performance. Through the late-night rehearsals and the long, hellish week leading up to the performances, the two got to know each other even better than before. In the celebration of the show, the two birds truly noticed each other, and a spark was formed. On that night, Songbird had fallen under the spell of a red-headed rose. Pigeons flocked to her rescue and put a reassuring wing on the small Songbird's back. "I've got it from here," he said to another bird who had been caring for her. "Seriously, she's a part of my cast. She's like family." Family? Songbird thought. He barely knew her, yet through the simple shared experience of a beautiful theatrical endeavor, he had welcomed her as family. A pigeon who says something like that, who believes something like that, must have an exceptionally good heart. Must be someone far too valuable to ever take for granted, she thought.
After this moment, the two became best friends. Yet as all great romantic tales, the spark between them could not catch until the third act. Acclaimed by other birds, both Songbird and Pigeon knew that they should not think of each other romantically, but they continued to dance around each other, flittering and giggling at each other like doves. As onlookers to their growing friendship, it became clear to the flock that they were meant to be. One day, Pigeon was approached by his friend, Crow. He had observed their budding love and asked, "Why have you not asked her to fly with you?" Pigeon realized he had to make a decision and let his heart speak for itself.
On one fateful Friday, Pigeon decided to draw a curtain on their first act as lovebirds. The setting was on an unusual day, surrounded with mystery and unexpected magic, Friday the 13th. The flock was gathered for their weekly meeting, and Songbird was sitting in front of the whole group. When Pigeon saw her, he knew he had made the right decision. And just looking at her filled his heart with joy and his stomach with butterflies. If just looking at her could make him feel grounded and high at the same time, he couldn't imagine the feeling of calling her his own. Pigeon flew up to her and leaned in for a gentle kiss on the cheek after presenting her with a single rose. Songbird's heart swelled with love as she accepted the rose from the bird she had admired for so many months. No words were needed. They both knew it was the start of something. And with the single rose, he showed the whole flock that they would be flying together from this moment forward. The flock gleefully gave them a standing ovation, approving of the beautiful declaration of love.
The lovebirds became inseparable. Every morning as the sun rose, Songbird would clean her feathers and greet the sun with a glorious song. Pigeon would listen and melt as the melody floated through the air. Each day brought a new sun, and with each sun, Pigeon and Songbird fell deeper and deeper in love. One morning, the two birds prepared for a trip with friends to pick apples. Among the trees, Pigeon looked up at Songbird and out of the blue, grabbed her by the wing, pulled her close, and dipped her for a loving kiss. Click! A friend quickly took a picture of the pose. From then on, their iconic flight pattern always involved their loving dip wherever they flew.
Together, they felt complete. But as life always throws us curveballs, they could not always physically be together. Songbird's studies brought her to the land of Puerto Rico. The time apart was difficult for the two lovebirds, but what the lovebirds came to realize is that difficult times in a relationship will always be overcome by choosing each other first. Soon after Songbird's graduation from WPI, she admirably chose to follow her passion for the arts, which took her far away. She had to move to New York and leave Pigeon behind. Pigeon was not afraid to fight for their love. He knew they could survive anything. He flew to visit her, migrating back and forth many times a year. But eventually, the two realized they could be apart no longer, and they found themselves a Brooklyn nest.
As they came up on 7 years of being together, Pigeon knew he didn't want anyone else. He had known this for a long time, though. They had been through so much together and had written such a beautiful story, he wanted to plan a new chapter they would tell for years to come. It just so happened that one day he heard from their friends, the two small mockingbirds, that they were flying off to the Mediterranean and wanted them to join in their temporary migration. It seemed like fated timing, and he knew the time was right to put his plan into action. They embarked on the journey to explore all the amazing cities that Pigeon and Songbird had only dreamed of flying to, and who better to share that experience than a couple of their friends from the flock. It was a magical time, filled with adventure, laughter, and most importantly, love.
One beautiful morning in Italy, the two birds came upon a castle. Pigeon became nervous, but decided instead to puff up his feathers as he began to sing his song of poetry. Lots of poetry. Okay, I'm gonna be real, maybe a bit too much poetry, but it was cute, so the mockingbirds let it slide. But the songbird, she was immediately mesmerized, and she slowly began to ponder, is this the moment I've been waiting for? He was saying all the right things, and even though she didn't want to think it possible, she fell even more deeply in love with him. Finally, Pigeon knelt down. My beautiful songbird, he said, you've always been my princess. Will you do me the honor of being my queen? He pulled out a small box from under his wing, proceeded to open it, and produced the most sparkling stone she'd ever seen. Oh yeah, and she said yes.
The lovebirds were engaged, showing the whole world what they meant to each other. So a date was picked, invitations were sent, and the two birds grew more eager each day. Which brings us to the present moment for Songbird and Pigeon. The day they've dreamt for years. Shared with friends and family, the two lovebirds begin writing the next pages of their story together. One part of that story that we all know is that they will live happily ever after.